Welcome back to Bedtime Blocks. It's warm inside tonight, but the forest feels different. I've been seeing something out there, two white eyes, always watching from the same spot, just beyond the edge of my torchlight. Tonight, I'm going to tell you the whole story. What happened when I stepped into the fog, and what was waiting for me on the other side. So get comfortable, let the fire crackle, and let's begin. I noticed them the first night the fog rolled in from the taiga, a damp, quiet sort of fog that makes everything sound like it's happening 2 rooms away. I was sorting logs in the chest by the window when something tugged the corner of my vision, and when I looked up I saw 2 small, perfectly round points of white sitting between the spruce trunks, steady as stars that had forgotten to blink. They weren't torches, because no fire flicker wavered around them, no orange warmth or smoke. They were just eyes, pale and cold, suspended at the very edge of my render distance, where the forest turns to a tidied blur. My first thought was skeletons, because they'll stare at you like that when they drift in the dark, but arrows never came, and the eyes never moved, not even when I opened the door and stepped out onto the porch with my shield tucked under my arm and a stack of cooked salmon in my hand, like a ridiculous offering. I stood there listening to the fog drip from the leaves and to the gentle heartbeat of the night, waiting for the hiss of a creeper or the wet shuffle of a drowned from the river. But the only sound was the cabin itself settling and the soft clunk of the smoker as it cooled. The eyes stayed. They did not advance. They did not fade. They only watched, and I found myself whispering into the fog, "Hello?" Which is a funny thing to do in Minecraft when the only friends online are 2 time zones away and already sleeping. By morning they were gone, replaced by the usual grey of distant trunks and the faint moving breath of the forest. I told myself I'd been tired, that I'd been staring at the glow of the lantern too long, and my brain had smudged it into the trees. So I did the normal, boring, settling in things you do when you intend to make a world feel like home. I lined the path with spruce slabs to stop the snow from crusting it into ankle-breaking bumps, and planted sweet berry bushes in neat rows with fence posts to keep me from stabbing myself on the thorns, and extended the little dock on the river where I fish and complain about the luck of the sea. I even took the flint and steel and walked a measured circle around the cabin, placing torches every 9 blocks until the ground felt combed and safe, counting under my breath like a silly warding spell. It felt good to be busy, to make the world settle into a grid of certainty. But night falls quick when the clouds hang low, and that second evening I was back at the window, pretending to read a book and listening for the sound of footsteps that Minecraft doesn't have, but your brain adds anyway. Right when the clock on the wall swung past midnight, the fog drew a veil between the spruces again, the shadows deepened, and the eyes returned to the exact same place. 2 neat pinpricks of winter white light, patient, as if they had been waiting politely for me to notice them again. Curiosity is heavier than fear when you're inside a cabin you built with your own hands, so I put down the book, took a stack of torches, and slipped into my boots. The door's iron hinge gave a small, familiar groan as I opened it, and the cold night air pushed a careful hand across my face. Mobs were scarce, the torch grid was doing its job, and any zombie that wandered in from the unlit forest would find the berry bushes first and grumble itself into a tangle of thorns. I walked the path slowly, counting as I went, and when I reached the last lantern where the light meets the fog, I stopped and crouched, because somehow crouching always feels safer, like I'm less visible to code that doesn't care one way or another. The eyes didn't flinch. They were further than the limit where name tags appear, further than the distance where a spider's red look becomes angry. I placed a torch, then another, measured, stepping forward so the light followed me like a loyal dog. And here's the strange part I don't like admitting. The distance between me and those eyes didn't change. Each torch pushed the world's edge out, and each time The eyes settled back to that same far place, just beyond, like a slider I couldn't drag to the right. I kept moving until my pockets were empty and my little breadcrumb line of fire stretched deep into the taiga, and still the eyes stood there, unbothered by light, immune to distance, trapped at the horizon of the world like a UI element only I could see. I slept badly that night, the kind of sleep where you wake in your Minecraft bed and stare at the ceiling planks and count them like sheep, because you're certain you'll hear something if you just listen hard enough. Dawn came pale and limp. I crafted a spyglass out of the amethyst I tucked away from a geode and a cut of copper, and for once I felt clever, because if the world wouldn't let me walk to the eyes, maybe I could bring the eyes to me. I climbed the roof, steadying myself on the chimney, and aimed the spyglass toward that same direction. Leaves sharpened, snow caps crystallized. A fox trotted through a drift and left a dotted line of footprints that made me smile in spite of myself. And then, as the spyglass reached the edge where the fog should have chewed everything to watercolor, I found the eyes, crisp and exact. No glow around them, just two circular discs of white set in a darker shape I could not resolve, like the game had rendered them at full resolution and turned everything else to a suggestion. I tried to mark the spot with coordinates and realized how absurd the act was when the number on my screen wouldn't stabilize, twitching back and forth by tiny increments, as if something was pushing the world under my feet. I lowered the glass, and the eyes vanished. I raised it, and they snapped back in place, waiting, and I had the tight, childish thought that if I dropped the spyglass, the eyes would be stuck forever, little bits of white in a purple shard on my cabin roof. But I didn't, and I wish now that I had. By the third night, the server chat felt haunted, even though I was alone. I typed anyway, because talking into silence makes you feel less like the only breathing thing in a place. "Anyone seeing weird render artifacts tonight?" I wrote, and the blinking cursor answered with its own heartbeat and then nothing. I cooked food because cooking is a ritual that makes fear step back, and I cleaned my inventory because order is a spell, and I replaced the front door's pressure plate with a button because I was suddenly tired of things opening without me telling them to. When the fog rolled in, thicker than before, the eyes appeared without ceremony, in the exact coordinates my body already knew, and for the first time I felt watched in a way that didn't feel like the game. There's a difference between a mob's AI line and the sensation of attention, and if you've played long enough you know it. Skeletons watch to shoot, creepers watch to pathfind, endermen watch to mirror your movement, but this watching felt like a question being asked and patiently held out for me to answer. I did what I always do when I don't have a better plan. I wrote it down. I took a book and quill and described the eyes, the fog, the torchline, the failure of distance, the spyglass clarity, and on the last line I wrote, "If you understand me, do something new." And I left the book on the windowsill like a half-believed offering, then turned away to let the quiet chew on it. When I looked back, the book was exactly where I'd left it, but a fresh page had been added, blank and waiting, and the eyes were closer by exactly one tree. I didn't run. Running is noisy and invites chase, and besides, the world didn't feel like it wanted me to run. It felt like a classroom after hours, chalk dust glittering in the projector beam, and I was the last student who'd realized the teacher was still sitting there in the dark. I opened the door and stepped onto the porch, hands empty to make my heartbeat honest. The fog was cold enough to bead on my armor, and for once I took the chest plate off because the metallic clink sounded too loud and too human in a place that had leaned toward myth. I spoke the way you speak to a skittish animal, long breaths between words so my voice wouldn't clip into the trees. "What are you?" I asked, and the eyes did what they had not done in 3 nights. They blinked, not like a mob's simple animation, but like something remembering the mechanics of closing and opening after a long time without a face. I walked until the porch lantern no longer warmed my back. and the packed path gave way to soft, undisturbed snow. The eyes receded with my steps, maintaining that same careful, teasing distance, and I realized the torchline I'd laid the night before had disappeared, every single stick and flame gone, as if the world had slurped them back up to make the darkness honest again. I put a torch down, and it would not place, the ghost of its outline flickering red at my feet, even though there was no reason it should be invalid, and when I pressed the key harder, as if force mattered to code, I heard, faint and clean and close, the sound of a wooden door hinge turning in the forest behind the eyes. As if somewhere out there another cabin had just opened its door to me. I won't pretend I wasn't tempted to chase that sound, because doors mean rooms and rooms mean answers, and in a world made of coordinates, any shape you can walk around feels like a promise, but the ground beneath the spruces had changed, softened, as if the blocks had become powder snow while still looking like ordinary topsoil. I tested it with a cautious step and sank a fraction too far, then felt the tug of the game try to nudge me out of bounds like a gentle bouncer. I stepped back, and the eyes came forward the same small measure, as if we were tethered, and the slack had shifted from my side to theirs. "All right," I said, more to keep my courage inflated than because I thought the eyes understood speech, and I pulled out a stack of cobblestone and tried to build a bridge, but the first block placed sideways by itself, rotated 90 degrees in a direction blocks do not rotate, then clicked out of existence without particles, without a sound, leaving me holding a stack of stone that wasn't getting any smaller. I laughed, stupid and breathy, because sometimes humor is defiance in a soft sweater, and the sound startled a bird from a branch over my head that I swear I hadn't seen render until that moment. The eyes blinked a second time, slower, and I had the free-fall feeling of realizing a pattern. The book, the added page, the missing torches, the sideways stone, the blink. Responses, each one a little closer to my language, each one a handshake, half completed. I put the book down on the snow and wrote, "If you're imitating, try this." And then I jumped once and placed a block beneath me in the same breath, the old pillar-up move every player knows, and from the dark the sound of a door echoed again, higher this time, like a second story. And the eyes rose by one block, floating, watching from a height that matched mine. I don't know how long we practiced, only that the moon stood still while we did it, halfway between the spruce tops and the black roof of the world. And the ambient night track had faded until all I could hear was my own breath and the hush of the fog folding and unfolding against the trees. I crouched, the eyes lowered. I tossed a snowball. Something in the dark produced the lightest little puff of powder, a downy mimic, not quite right but close enough to make the hair on my arms stand up. I ate a piece of salmon. A wet, delicate sound answered, as if a mouth with no hunger had decided to pretend because that's what the lesson required. It felt like teaching someone the rules of a game they already knew in some deeper way. And for a lull I forgot to be afraid, which is the mistake all good ghost stories warn you about. Then the moment I stopped thinking of the eyes as a threat and started thinking of them as a student, the fog pulled back a single block's worth more, just enough for me to glimpse the outline those eyes belonged to. And everything in me recoiled because it wasn't a mob, and it wasn't a player, and it wasn't anything with a texture I recognized. It was shaped like the space you leave when you mine out a block and don't place anything back. The negative of a thing, a silhouette with edges that didn't alias right, as if the world had cut a model from itself and forgotten to fill the hole. The eyes hung inside that absence, clean and bright. And when I whispered without meaning to, "Are you from here?" the absence tilted its head the way my armor stand sometimes does when a glitch jolts it, and behind the eyes something like a door opened and shut, a hollow wooden sound, patient, inviting, and very, very far away. I knew then that I would follow, because stories like this don't let you choose the ordinary. They gently herd you toward the thin places in the world until you step through just to see if your name sounds the same on the other side. I went back to the cabin, not to hide, but to prepare, because rituals matter, and I wanted one small thing done right before I walked into whatever waited between those trees. I took off everything enchanted and left it on the armor stand, because the hum of enchantment suddenly felt like a bell that might ring at the wrong time, and I packed only what felt honest: bread, torches that probably wouldn't place, a stack of plain oak planks, the spyglass, and the book. I wrote a note and tacked it to the wall by the door. If I don't return by sunrise, break the bed and light the beacon. Knowing no one would read it tonight, but writing it anyway because promises made to empty rooms still count. When I stepped back outside, the fog was waiting like a curtain half drawn. The eyes lifted, then settled, acknowledging me. And I thought about spawn points and chunks and the invisible math that runs under our feet. And for the first time it occurred to me that maybe I hadn't been the only one measuring distances, that maybe those eyes had been counting me, learning me, like I'd been counting torches and blocks. I crossed the threshold where my path ended, and the true forest began, and the air changed in that way you can't code, the way it changes in real life when you step from a room that remembers you into a place that doesn't care, and yet weirdly, the trees felt courteous, branches holding themselves just out of the way, snow refusing to squeak under my boots, as if the world had decided to make itself easy for me to cross. The eyes drifted back, leading but never pulling, and the wooden door sound repeated at a steady interval, always just a little further ahead, as if it were the heartbeat of a house that moved when you weren't looking. I tried to mark my route, carving tiny notches into trunks with my axe, but each time I looked back, the notches had migrated to a different tree, keeping the same pattern, but stepping sideways like they were shy about being seen. We walked like that for the length of a night that refused to pass, and every so often I'd lift the spyglass and find the eyes perfectly in focus, the absence around them crisp as a freshly mined block, and each time I'd lower it and feel the breathless certainty that if I lifted it one more time, they would be too close. And then what? I don't know. I still don't. What I do know is that eventually the trees opened into a clearing I swear I've never seen. A flat circle of ground the snow had skipped, as if an invisible roof had kept it dry. And at the center of that bare place was a door frame made of nothing, 4 vertical lines of air, and 2 horizontal ones drawn in by absence alone. And when the eyes reached it, they paused, expectant, like a host waiting at a threshold for you to say you're ready to be welcomed inside. I stood at the edge of the clearing like you stand at the lip of a pool you're not sure is cold, one toe extended, not touching yet, letting the space itself tell you whether it wants you. The frame was emptiness, shaped like a door, a neat outline of nothing, and through it I could see more forest, more fog, the same ordinary world folded into a rectangle and made formal by intent. The eyes waited on the far side, calmly suspended in that cut-out silhouette, as if they had been carved to fit it. I did the sensible Minecraft thing first. I threw a snowball. It passed through without a sound, no splat, no particle burst, just a soft enrollment into the air, like it had always been there and I had merely noticed late. I placed a block in front of the frame to test collision, but the block stuttered in my hand, ghosted red, and refused the world again. So I tried something that wasn't a block. I placed the book. That, the world accepted. It settled at the threshold like a doormat, pages fluttering though there was no wind, and words I did not write inscribed themselves on the top sheet, tidy and even, not in my font, not in the game's font, but in something that felt like the idea of handwriting, as if the world were miming a person who'd only heard of pens. "Come through without your name," the book said. I read the sentence twice, frowning at the oddness of it, then checked the screen where my name tag would float above me in third person. It sat there bright and ordinary. I took off my helmet, my boots, my chest plate, as if names could be hidden under armor. No change. Then I remembered the bed. Spawn binds you the way a name binds, and I realized the instruction might be simpler than it sounded. So I walked home under a moon that refused to move, broke my bed with a single careful tap, felt that tiny lurch of rootlessness you always feel when your anchor is gone, and then walked back to the frame, lighter by some invisible weight I only felt after I'd set it down. The first step through didn't feel like falling, or like teleporting, or like riding the nether's nausea wave. It felt like stepping from a warm room into a cold one, a dainty recalibration of the air on my skin, as if the world had swapped one texture sheet for another while keeping the geometry intact. On the other side, the clearing was the same clearing, but the fog had a grain to it, a knitting of fine threads that reminded me of the shader packs I'd sworn off because they made my cabin look too cinematic. The trees stood just where they had before, except the bark wore a pattern my eyes slid off of, like Enderman particles had been pressed flat and glued to the trunks. The eyes floated 3 blocks away now, no longer glued to the horizon, held in the negative of a head that dipped in a deliberate nod, exactly the kind of nod you give a skittish animal to say yes, I see you, and no, I won't rush you. I turned to look back at the frame and almost laughed because from this side the door wasn't a door at all. It was my clearing without a frame, my torch line restored, my cabin a small warm smear between the trunks, until I blinked and the view snapped to something else. The bare suggestion of a house on stilts over a black lake. Lanterns hung at mismatched heights like constellations that hadn't agreed on their order yet. I blinked again and saw my own porch. Another blink, a stone tower with no stairs. The 4th blink returned the frame and the ordinary cold. The book lay where I'd set it, straddling the threshold, and the newly written line had changed. Leave language, it said now, and I understood with a kind of resigned calm that felt like stepping into a riddle. That if I wanted to keep going, I should stop trying to bind this place with labels, stop counting, stop classifying everything into the neat little bins that make a world tame. I am not good at not naming things. Even in silence, my brain runs a ticker that files and sorts, but I tried for the sake of the lesson. I didn't say spruce, I didn't say snow, I didn't say door. I let my eyes see shape and contrast and rhythm instead. The repeat of verticals, the soft hill of the clearing's ring, the waveform of lantern bright to shadow dark, and back again. The eyes brightened as if this pleased them. The ground, which had felt unstable before, firmed up under my boots, and I took that as permission to move. The first steps were easy. The way walking along the border of a map is easy because you're using the edge as your ruler. Then the trees began to arrange themselves into hallways that were not hallways, encouraging me forward without quite letting me choose the angle of my turn. I lifted the spyglass once, then remembered the book's injunction, and lowered it without looking, because magnifying is another kind of naming. The eyes drifted with me, sometimes ahead, sometimes behind, always at a comfortable distance, like the world's version of a safety bubble. Now and then, the wooden door sound came again, closer than before, and on instinct I matched my steps to it the way you fall into step next to a friend. And something like relief moved through the trees, a breeze that didn't touch the leaves, but tugged at the fog in a happy way. I wanted to speak, to narrate, because story is how I keep fear on a leash, but language felt too loud here, the way a torch felt too bright. So I let the place move me like a river carries a boat that has put down its oars. We reached an opening that wasn't a clearing so much as a subtraction, as if chunks had been copied and then pasted 1 block to the left, leaving behind a paper-thin gap that ran in a perfect square around a patch of ground. Inside that square, the world looked almost right, but every texture mapped 1 pixel off, and it made my eyes water, like staring at text you know you can read, but the letters refused to sit still. At the center stood a house. Not my cabin, not quite, but built from the same recipe, the same measurements, the same fond mistakes. One extra trapdoor on the porch because I like the sound it makes when I flip it open and shut. A lantern hung one block lower than is sensible because I wanted to see it from my bed at night. The windows were opaque, not frosted, not tinted, just decisionless, like the idea of glass before you choose clarity or color. The eyes stopped at the edge of the misaligned square and waited, and I understood that I was meant to go in alone. I stepped across the line. It was a small motion, one boot heel down, the other following, but it made a sound like the game placing a block very far away, a hollow click, satisfying and not at the same time. The house's door was shut. Its handle was a negative of an iron nugget, a little bead of missing, and when I grasped it I felt nothing at all, not smooth, not cold, just a polite surrender as the door swung inward and let the dark breath out. Inside smelled like the way an unloaded chunk looks, not empty, but waiting for an instruction that hasn't arrived. The room wore all the shapes I knew, but each had been sketched in first draft. The furnace sat where I always place it, but the slot for fuel was a rectangle of darker shadow, not a hole. The bed had the right red, but it didn't dip where a person would sleep. The chest murmured the faintest wood creak when I touched it, but when I opened the lid, nothing changed. No inventory grid, no rows waiting to hold my life. I set my real bread on the real table I'd made in my real world, and it looked wrong on the wrong wood, like a joke told in the wrong language, and I felt suddenly, sharply homesick for a place that was perhaps 10 blocks away, and perhaps a very long distance indeed. "Okay," I said out loud, breaking my own rule because some thresholds ask for a word. "If this is a mirror, where is the reflection?" The house answered with the smallest of rearrangements, a ripple in the plank floor like the flicker of an old monitor when you bump the desk. A shape stood in the far corner that I swear hadn't been there a moment before, and when my eyes parted the dark I realized what I was looking at. My armor stand, except it wasn't a stand. It was the gap that a stand would leave if you cut it out of the world with sharp scissors. It tilted its non-head in that now familiar way, and for an absurd second I almost asked if it wanted the chest plate I'd left at home, as if dressing a hole would fill it. Instead I put my hand where its shoulder would be, and the room brightened one grade, every edge crawling a pixel closer to right, and from somewhere above us I heard a door open onto a hallway that wasn't in this house, one floor higher than any floor this cabin had. I went up the stairs that were not stairs. They were the idea of movement, folded into the corner of the room, a slope that asked your feet to pretend you were climbing while the world scrolled under you to help the lie along, and found myself in a space that felt like an attic does in summer, hot because of proximity to a roof, dusty because of old boxes that are never quite as sealed as you imagine. Except there were no boxes, and the roof here was the underside of the night itself, beams of black running parallel with the moon's pause. There was a single door, and it was the kind of door you draw when you're little and you haven't learned how perspective works yet. Flat, straight on, a rectangle that declares itself a door by sheer stubbornness. The eyes were on the other side. I didn't see them. I knew them, the way you know a friend, by the way the house quiets when they walk up the path. I put my palm against the wood that wasn't wood and felt exactly nothing again, which somehow had become its own kind of texture, and I turned the handle and opened onto a balcony that should not have fit on the roof of a single-room cabin. The forest spread below like a printed map you could lay a ruler on. Far off, too far, my torch grid stitched an embroidery sampler of safety through the trees. Close by, just beyond arm's reach, the eyes floated at railing height, watching with a patience that had unknotted something in my chest without my permission. "If you want me to understand," I said, not bothering with the rule this time, because doors are for speaking, "show me something that is mine and not mine at once." The world obliged. Clouds that had been static all night began to move, not across the sky, but down, Through the trunks, a slow drift of pale that passed through wood and stone without argument and came to a stop in the shape of a person standing in the clearing below. They were the color of fog and wore my outline the way the eyes wore their negative face. They turned their head toward me, and for the first time since the first night, I felt the ordinary kind of fear, clean, bright, useful, because there is something very sobering about seeing your stance echoed by a thing that is not you. I didn't run. I also didn't wave or call out, because it felt like the sort of moment that would sour if you handled it too roughly. The fog person, me but not, stood at the exact center of the square where textures misaligned, and when they lifted their hand, I realized they were holding a spyglass of their own, except it wasn't glass. It was a tube of absence, a rolled-up piece of the world you could see through to more world. They lifted it to where their eye would be, and the white discs in the negative face glowed warmer, accepting as if this were the correct move. I didn't have to be told what to do. My body already knew the choreography. I raised my real spyglass. The moment the circle of vision clicked into place, my field of view filled not with the fog person below, but with a perfect image of my own cabin as it had been earlier tonight. Lanterns warm, hearth lit, bed intact, note on the wall. Except this time, sitting at my table with a book open and head bowed, was me. Not fog, not absence. Just solid me doing something I knew I had not done. Watched my other self lift the quill and write, then pause, then cross something out with a decisive swipe. The eyes hovered at the window in that scene, exactly where they had hovered in the real beginning, and my other self looked up at them with a softness I recognized from old screenshots where I'd built something beautiful after a long mining session. The spyglass image panned, as if on its own, to the note on the wall. The words were different than the ones I had left. If I don't return by sunrise, leave the door open. I lowered the glass, heart stuttering, because now there were two instructions in the world. Break the bed and light the beacon. Leave the door open, and I didn't know which gravity to obey. The eyes drifted closer, so close I could see the faintest ring at their edge, not a glow so much as a seam, the place where whatever they were met, whatever they weren't. The fog person below lifted their free hand and made a small, unmistakable motion with their fingers. A beckoning, yes, but also a question. Can we trust each other to choose the same door? I thought about what it means to leave a door open in Minecraft. Sometimes it's hospitality, sometimes it's negligence, sometimes it's the loudest kind of courage you can manage at midnight. I thought about spawn and beds and how the game keeps you by binding you to a place. And I thought about how this night had asked me again and again to unbind, to peel off labels and anchors, and let the world be what it was without my naming. I made my decision, the way you decide to jump into water, all at once, before thought can climb up and grab your collar. I turned from the balcony, went back down the knot stairs, crossed the sketched room where everything waited to be made specific, and stepped out into the misaligned clearing. The eyes followed at shoulder height like lanterns someone else was carrying for me. We walked to the frame that was a door when it wanted to be. I picked up the book from the threshold and on the blank page wrote in the tidy, even script the place had taught me, I will leave my door open. Then I stepped back through into my world, where the snow squeaked again, and the spruce bark wore the right number of pixels, and my torchlight shone in a way no clever place could mimic. I walked home, opened the cabin door wide enough that the night could see the hearth, and I did not close it, even when the wind drafted snow across the floor, even when the ambient track flared and faded. Because sometimes you say yes to a question you don't yet understand by simply not saying no. I didn't sleep that night, not because I couldn't, but because closing my eyes felt like the wrong kind of closing. Instead, I sat at my table with the lantern turned low, watching the open doorway like you watch a fire, half expecting sparks, half hoping for them. Outside, the forest stayed unnaturally still, as if all the usual life had agreed to step back and give space for whatever was meant to come through. Every so often, I thought I saw a faint white shimmer at the edge of the light, just enough to stir my pulse, but it always faded before I could decide whether it had shape. The wind moved differently too. Normally it rattles the spruce leaves in lazy bursts, but tonight it moved in even, measured intervals, almost like breathing. Around what would have been dawn, if time had been working properly, a small sound carried from the tree line, a light, deliberate thunk like something setting down a block. I didn't rise from my chair. I just angled my head, listening, and heard another thunk. Then another, spaced evenly, like someone building a path toward me, one slow step at a time. The sound stopped just before it reached the cabin threshold. For a long while there was only silence. Then, with the kind of certainty that makes your stomach feel heavier, I saw it. 2 white eyes, floating low in the darkness, just beyond the open door. But these weren't the same eyes I'd seen in the forest before. They were closer together, smaller, like they belonged to something crouched or sitting. I leaned forward in my chair, not moving too fast, and let the dim lantern light brush the shape around them. It was faint, like fog still clinging to the air, but the outline was familiar in a way that made my throat tighten. The slope of the shoulders, the angle of the head. It was me. Or rather, it was the fog version of me, the same figure I'd seen in the misaligned clearing. They didn't enter, not yet. They just sat there, gazing in, waiting for some permission I didn't know how to give. I thought about the book and the instructions I'd written, about how leaving the door open had been my answer, and I realized maybe they were waiting for me to invite them, not just allow them. So I said, "You can come in," softly, without lifting my voice above the steady beat of the wind. The figure rose to its feet and stepped forward, crossing the threshold without a sound. The air changed when they entered. Not colder, not warmer, just fuller, as though the cabin's small space had been stretched in some invisible direction. They walked exactly like I do when I'm in my own world. Careful not to knock into the table corners, eyes flicking once toward the furnace, as if to check it's off. One hand brushing against the wall, like they're feeling the grain. When they reached the other side of the room, they turned back to me and stood still, just watching. It wasn't hostile. It wasn't even curious in the way you think of curiosity. It was like they were memorizing the room through me, letting me be the version of this place that mattered. I gestured to the chair opposite mine, and they sat, their outlines settling like mist, finding the shape of a container. We stayed that way for what could have been minutes or hours. Then, without speaking, they placed something on the table between us. A block. Oak plank, but not exactly. The color was off by a fraction, the texture almost right, but blurred in places, like it had been recreated from memory. They pushed it toward me and waited. I hesitated before touching it. Part of me expected it to vanish like the torches in the forest had, but when I set my palm against it, it felt real, solid, even slightly warm from their hand. I flipped it over, as if that might give me answers, and noticed something strange. On one side, the grain of the wood didn't match the others. It wasn't a repeating Minecraft texture. It was more like handwriting, tiny, faint lines running in patterns that weren't random. I squinted, tilting it toward the lantern, and realized they were words. Not in any language I recognized, but words nonetheless. Rows and rows of them, flowing edge to edge across that single face of the block. I looked up, and the figure tilted their head in the same way I'd seen the eyes do in the forest, slow and deliberate. The message was clear without being said. They'd brought me something from their world, something that carried meaning I couldn't yet read. I set the block down carefully, like it might shatter if I was careless, and asked, "Is this for me?" They didn't nod or shake their head, but their eyes brightened just a touch, and that was answer enough. We stayed like that a while longer, me staring at the block, them staring at me, until I realized that whatever this exchange was, it wasn't finished. I stood, crossed to my chest, and pulled out a block of my own. Not rare, not enchanted, just one of the spruce planks I'd cut from the trees outside my cabin. I placed it on the table and slid it toward them, mirroring their earlier gesture. Their eyes stayed fixed on me for a moment, as though they were making sure I understood the weight of what I'd done. Then they reached out and took it. For a second, their hand passed through it, flickering like the game didn't know whether to allow the interaction. The door is closed for now, but I know it won't stay that way forever. If you enjoyed spending the night here in the cabin, listening to this story, make sure you subscribe so you can come back for the next one. Until then, keep your lantern lit. And maybe, just maybe, leave your door open.